Good afternoon, and welcome back to Stories with Don. We are on the second half of the first chapter of Robin Hood. And this chapter is entitled Robin Hood an Outlaw, and it's about how he comes to be an outlaw. And the first part was where he has been captured by some foresters, and a couple woodsmen have rescued him, and so they are on the run from the foresters. And they have stopped under a large oak tree in the woods. The old woodman paused beneath a huge oak and sat down to rest on a great rock. "Where's Hob?" he panted. "Dead, father," replied Will. "The chief forester took him with a shaft between the shoulders. Hob was too slow to move." "Aye, Hob was always slow to move," returned the old man. Well, well, his fate will be ours if we're e'er come in reach of a forester's longbow again. Aye, Will, I thought it was all up wi' ye when ye dropped your hand to your knife. Yon chief forester is indeed a hard and cruel man." "It was naught but your words, father, that kept me quiet," replied Will. "It's hard to be beaten like a dog for nothing at all." "Aye," said the old man, "we that once were holders of the land are treated as dogs, and worse than dogs, by our Norman masters. But we can never show our faces in the village again, Will. We must take to the forest and hide there, or we shall soon be lodged in Nottingham jail, waiting for the rope and master hangman, as an example to all Saxon hinds who dare to disobey their masters." "And that, or even worse, would have been my fate had it not been for your brave and friendly deed in cutting me loose," cried Robin, seizing Will's hand. "A thousand thanks to you, and a thousand thanks again." "'Twas naught," said the woodman. "I did but give a slash or two with my knife. But how fell ye into their hands?" Robin told his story, and the Saxon woodman nodded grimly. I'm having trouble talking today. "'Tis all a piece with their cruelty and treachery," said Will. "Any trick will serve to lure us into their clutches." The old man sprang up from the root where he had been resting. "Well," said he, "we are out of their hands now, and must take care to keep out. Follow me, lads, and I will be your guide to a safer part of the greenwood." But Robin did not move. "By my faith, friends," he said, "it goes hard with me to think of the two poor fellows still in their grip. I fear their fate is certain if they be carried to Nottingham." "As certain as gallows and rope can make it," cried Will the woodman, "for they are two of the outlaws who range the hidden depths of the forest. There's bitter feud between them and the foresters, and proud, too, will be the cruel sheriff to get a couple of them into his clutches." "Aye," said the old man, "they be poor fellows driven from their homes by Norman tyranny and the harsh forest laws. Now they hide in the wood and live on the king's deer, and are lost men if they fall into the power of the law." "Guide me to the path they must take toward Nottingham," cried Robin. "That I can easily do," said the old woodman, "or, for matter of that, my son could do it. But to what end? What can one man do against a whole band of the king's foresters?" "I know not yet what I should do," cried Robin, "but I cannot bear to think of the poor fellows being carried off as I was being carried off, and I will gladly venture a stroke on their behalf if opportunity should offer." "Well said, comrade," cried Will, "and I will be your guide. Father, betake yourself to the forest and secure your safety. We will meet again at the great oak." Upon this, the little company broke up at once. Robin, led by Will, struck out by a new path back across the swamp, and the old woodman betook himself to the depths of Sherwood. Within 20 minutes, Robin and Will were approaching the little hamlet under cover of the trees, but on the opposite side from that which they had escaped. Peering from the depths of a thicket, They were just in time to see the foresters march away from the hamlet with their prisoners in their midst. The search for the fugitives had been given up at the edge of the dangerous swamp, and the band was now returning to Nottingham. They were leaving the sled where it had come to rest, and near it lay poor Hob, just as he had fallen. "Rescue and revenge," muttered Robin Hood, and Will nodded and repeated the words, but wonderingly, as if he could not divine in what manner they were to be fulfilled. "Now, Will," said Robin, "describe exactly the road yon proud foresters must follow to reach the town." Will plunged into the description, and Robin soon raised his hand. "Aye," said Robin, "that will suit me. A great open plain, you say. Guide me there, Will, and let us gain it before the foresters have crossed it." Will Stutely, for that was the woodman's full name, led the way, and they hurried through the trees and gained an open plain just as the foresters were in the very midst of it. Then Robin Hood left Will among the trees, stepped boldly into the open, and hailed the chief forester with a great shout. "Ho, forester!" he cried. "Give up thy prisoners, or it will be the worse for thee." The chief forester could scarcely believe his own eyes when he saw that Robin had come back alone, as it seemed, to face the great band of his enemies. But his anger was such that he made no reply. He only hastened to seize his bow and shoot the bold lad before he could retreat into the cover of the trunks. He drew his bow with all his strength and loosed the shaft, but the distance was too far, and the arrow stuck in the turf 20 yards from Robin Hood's feet. Then Robin showed them the power of his great bow, and the wonderful truth of his eye, for he laid a cloth-yard shaft on the string and shot it without hanging for an instant on his aim. Then a great scream burst from the chief forester's lips, and he went to earth, dragging madly at an arrow which had gone clean through his throat and stood out a hand's breadth behind his neck. And while the foresters stood in wonder at that terrible shot, again Robin's voice pealed out, "Loose ye the prisoners, or hold them at your peril." He waited an instant and let another shaft fly, and this went through the shoulder of one of the two men holding the nearest prisoner. Scarce had the arrow alighted than another shaft hummed among them, and smote the man on the other side of the prisoner, and the foresters saw that no man could stand behind a captive and live. Filled with fear at the deadly skill of this terrible young archer, the two men holding the second prisoner sprang away from him, lest a fourth shaft should light on one of them. Their motion of flight set two or three of the foresters running, and the panic spread to the whole band. Away they raced across the plain, for they feared to stand before the mighty archer whose arrows struck them down, while none of them could reach him. "They fly! They fly!" shouted Will the woodman in huge delight, springing from behind a bush whence he had watched the whole affair. "By my faith, Robin Hood, but you can draw a longbow in noble fashion. Now I will lend a hand to the prisoners." Will ran as hard as he could to the men and cut their bonds with his broad knife. In a few moments he was back, the outlaws running with him. The two men were full of joy and gratitude. They thanked and blessed Robin Hood 100 times, for they knew very well they would have been hanged out of hand as soon as they had been taken to Nottingham. "It is a wonder the foresters did not slay ye at once upon taking ye," said Will Stutely to them, "seeing that ye bear a wolf's head, and are a mark for any man's arrow." "They had received orders of the sheriff to bring in any prisoners they might seize," said the younger outlaw, a broad, stout young man with a fresh-colored face and a merry eye. "And as sure as my name is Much, and that my father is a miller, I thought I should look out over Nottingham Place through a halter. But not this time will it happen, thanks to the finest archer that ever roved in Greenwood." And he saluted Robin Hood once more. "Whither now?" cried the second outlaw. "We must all to cover, and that right speedily. Those foresters will raise the country on us without delay." True, true, cried Will Stutely. Come, Robin Hood, you must go with us too, or your head will pay for this day's work, if the sheriff's men can but once lay hands on you. Robin Hood nodded, for he knew that the woodman spoke truth, and away they went at once into the depths of the forest. On their way they passed the great oak where old Will Stutely was waiting for them. When he heard what had passed, he shook his head. This countryside will be no place for us any longer. Any man who has taken the least share of this stand against our tyrants will forfeit his life. I shall go to my daughter's house on the other side of the forest and hide. And you, Will, what is on your mind? I am for the greenwood life, father, cried Will. From this day Robin Hood is an outlaw, and I shall follow him. Robin was standing a little aside, leaning on his great bow. An outlaw? The word struck to his heart with a chill. Yes, it was. It must be true. He would be outlawed for rescuing these prisoners and for withstanding the brutal foresters. Then his spirits rose, and he looked round him on the beautiful greenwood, the great branches of the trees tossing in the sunshine and wind, and thought of the bold, free life of the open woodland. 1,000 times better to be an outlaw whose hand must keep his head, thought Robin, than to be dragged off and clapped into the sheriff's dungeon at Nottingham. And his heart became light, and he looked forward eagerly to the new life before him. The outlaws led him and Will Stutely ahead once more, Much the miller's son being the guide. For 2 hours they marched at a swift pace through the forest, and though there was never once the least sign of a path, Much strode on through glade and thicket as if he were following a highway. At length he paused in a small open space beneath a huge oak, and softly blew the horn which hung at his belt. It was at once answered, and he went forward again. Within 300 yards, the little party entered a clearing made by chopping away a holly and a hazel coppice, which had clustered thickly about the foot of a rocky wall. Here they were at once challenged, but upon the voice of Much being recognized, the challenger came forward, followed by a half-dozen stout fellows, every one with bow in hand and arrow on string, eyeing with what reception they should have greeted an enemy or stranger. The outlaws raised a shout of joy to see their comrades back again, for news of their capture had already been brought to the camp. Much and Wat are here again, they cried. Joy, joy, brave boys! How did ye escape the fangs of the forest mastiffs? List to me, comrades, cried Much. I was saved by this youth, and in him I bring to our band the finest archer and the boldest heart that I have ever met. He told the story, and the outlaws shouted praise of the bold deed which had saved their comrades. That evening, the outlaws were sitting around a great fire, making a merry supper off a fat deer which had been shot that day, and washing down their feast of fresh venison with great draughts of ale. Suddenly, amid the laughter and chatter, Much, the miller's son, spoke up in a loud voice. Comrades, he said, do ye not remember that it was but last night that we talked over the matter of making choice of a leader to govern our band so that we may have order in our doings? Aye, aye, cried out a stout yeoman, and the choice as good as fell on thee, Much, my billy boy. Then it shall fall on me no longer, replied the miller's son, for Much has met his master this day. I give my word and vote for Robin Hood. And I, cried Wat, and if any man dares to say nay to that, he shall feel the weight of my little switch of crab. And Wat took up a huge quarterstaff, fully 6 feet long, and brandished it about his head as if it had been the little switch, as he called it in jest. But one outlaw, a tall, dark-faced man, shook his head. I thought we half agreed that the best archer should be the captain, he growled. So it was said, cried Much, but nothing was settled upon. Well, I am content to leave it there. Yonder sits the best archer within the bounds of merry England, and he pointed to his deliverer. And how are we to know that? Grunted the tall outlaw. But Robin Hood struck in at once. Nay, much, he said, I will take no place here or elsewhere which I have not earned. It is true, then, that you had thought to make the best bowman the leader of your band? We talked of it as a way of settling the matter, admitted Much. Then let it stand, cried Robin Hood, and tomorrow we will shoot off our shafts man by man, and let the best shot win. Agreed, agreed, cried all, and the tall man, whose name was John Ford, shouted with the rest. And so, when supper was ended, they wrapped themselves in their cloaks and lay down to sleep before the fire. The next morning, the band of outlaws carried out the trial of shooting without delay. In a sunny glade, they set up such a mark as they were used to shoot at, and called upon Robin Hood to show his skill by putting a shaft in the center of it. But Robin shook his head. "'Tis no test at all," he cried. "Anyone could hit that mark, and then several would succeed. Nay, nay, set up a mark, I say, which will end the matter once and for all." "Set it up yourself, Robin Hood," cried John Ford, who had hitherto been looked upon as the best shot in the band, and had hoped to win the leadership. That I will, replied Robin Hood, "if it is agreed on that I may do so." "Aye, aye," cried the outlaws, "set up the mark, Robin Hood." So Robin took sprays of leaves and clusters of wild flowers and wove a little garland or wreath. Then he bade Will Stutely take the garland and hang it from the bough of an oak at the far end of the glade. "Now," said Robin, "I say that he is worthy of the name of an archer, who can send his shaft through the ring of yonder garland, yet touch neither leaf nor flower." The outlaws looked at each other in wonder. "Who could see such a mark?" cried one man. "It would need the eye of an eagle to take aim." "Aye, and the strength of a horse to bend a bow to send a shaft to such a distance," cried another. "I am out of it at once," shouted a third. "My bow will not reach so far." In the end, only John Ford was willing to try his chance at the garland, and he fitted a new string to his bow and chose the straightest, truest shafts from his quiver. The two competitors drew lots for the order in which they were to shoot, and John Ford had to shoot first. Each man was to lose 3 shafts at the mark. Ford loosed his first shaft, but it fell a good 10 yards short. He gave a grunt of vexation and drew his string farther back and shot higher, but still he fell short. A third time, and the arrow dropped under the garland. "I have gone as near to it as I may," he cried. "'Tis the most puzzling mark I ever tried at. No mortal man, I believe, will ever encompass it." "Shoot, shoot, Robin Hood," cried Much. "I saw thee loose 4 shafts in wondrous fashion yesterday, but this is another kind of mark to a man's body," and the miller's son shook his head, as if in doubt that his champion had set up too severe a test. Now Robin Hood stood forth, and the outlaws watched him in utter silence as he raised the great bow, laid his body into it, and drew the string taut. The shaft hummed through the air, and a shout of surprise burst from every lip as it was seen to dart through the very center of the garland and stick quivering in the trunk of the tree. Here's a picture of him making his shots. But the voice of John Ford rose above all. "Let him do it again! Let him do it again!" cried the tall outlaw. "It may have been a happy chance. Let him loose his 3 shafts." "Willingly," said Robin, and bent his bow and sent a second shaft whistling through the garland, and then a third. Nor did any of the 3 touch leaf or flower. The flight of the third shaft was followed by a great shout of applause from the onlookers. Every man there was an archer of more than common skill, so that all could appreciate this wonderful shooting, though none could help to rival it. "Robin Hood forever!" they shouted. "Never was such archery seen before in merry Sherwood." "Now," cried Much, "what say ye, comrades? Is not this Prince of Bowmen worthy to be our leader and captain?" He is, they cried. "We will live and die under Robin Hood." The outlaws swore to be faithful and true to their young leader, and the first of them to take the oath were Much the miller's son, and Wat, the two men he had saved from the foresters. Next came John Ford, who had been wholly won over by Robin's wonderful skill with the bow, and then Will Stutely, his companion in the flight to the forest, and lastly, the remainder of the band. "Listen to me, my comrades," cried Robin when all had given their fealty. "These be the laws that all in our band must follow. First, we will wage war on all the Norman tyrants who are enriching themselves with the spoils taken from the rightful owners of the soil, our Saxon brethren. Second, we will offer no violence to any poor or needy man, but aid him with the wealth we may gain from the Norman sheriff or baron or churchman. Third, no woman, rich or poor, Norman or Saxon, shall have aught to fear from us. These be our laws of fellowship." And the outlaws agreed to obey Robin's orders in every particular. They were still gathered around the garland, talking of the wonderful feat which had been performed, when a small bent man came shuffling through the trees. "Who is this?" cried Will Stutely, who was the first to see him. "A friend," replied Much. "He is one Lob, a cobbler of Nottingham. He watches for us in the town and is a sworn gossip of some of the sheriff's men. From them he learns what the sheriff thinks of doing against us, and then warns us that we may secure our safety." "How now, Lob?" he cried as the little man came up. "What news bring ye?" "Look out for yourselves, say I," replied Lob. "The sheriff is drawing together a strong force of foresters to march upon ye. He is in a terrible rage, for the chief forester and others have been slain in a fray yesterday, and he swears that he will have the heads of 3 outlaws for every man he hath lost. But most angry is he against some stranger of whom I have never heard before. There be notices set up in the marketplace offering a great reward for one Robert Fitzooth, also known as Robin Hood. Whoever shall bring him in as a prisoner or his head shall receive 300 silver pennies. "A great reward indeed," cried Much. "So you may see what value the sheriff puts upon you, master." He spoke to Robin Hood, and the latter nodded, but made no reply. How strange it seemed to Robin that Lob had seen us notice offering a reward for his life. It made him feel the reality of his outlawry. Then Much raised his bow and shouted, "Ho for the merry greenwood! Ho for our brave leader Robin Hood, Prince of Bowmen, and now in very deed Prince of Outlaws!" And the rest of the band joined in the cheer. Robin's eye flashed and his face brightened. He might be an outlaw, but with the vast forest open to him and a band of stout fellows to be his support, he feared no Norman sheriff in the land. And that is the end of chapter 1. I hope you're liking it so far. I really enjoy this book. I've already said that, but it's true, I do. So I hope you have a good rest of the day, that you stay well, and may God bless you. Bye.